The Vreth-Kai fleet hung in the dark like a row of black teeth. 3 warships, each one bigger than a city block, drifted silently through the outer corridor, a stretch of deep space that sat between human territory and the rest of the known galaxy. Nobody owned this stretch. Nobody policed it. That was the point. Commander Savil Rak stood at the front of his observation deck and stared at the little vessel crawling through the stars ahead of him. It was called the HSV Perseverance, a human colony ship built from old parts and held together with what the scans described as excess metallic bonding compound. His translator gave him the human word for it: weld. He let out a slow breath through the slits on the side of his neck. The ship was ugly. It was slow. It was completely alone. He turned to his data officer and gestured with 2 fingers. The data officer read from the screen without looking up. 412 juvenile humans, approximately 90 adult. Civilians, 6 registered security personnel, and 1 decommissioned artificial intelligence system listed as non-operational. The officer paused. FTL drive is functional but slow. Class 3 shields, no offensive weapon systems on record. Savil Rak clasped his hands behind his back and smiled, showing the 3 rows of flat grinding teeth his species used for crushing bone. Children, he said. The humans are moving children. His second-in-command, Drool, stepped up beside him. Drool was broader than Savil Rak and had a scar running from his left eye down to his jaw. He had been on 47 successful hunts. He was very good at his job. The juvenile specimens will bring high prices, Drool said. Human young are rare in the markets. Buyers have been asking for them for 2 seasons now. Savil Rak nodded slowly. He had already done the math in his head. The numbers were very good. He had heard about humans before. Every species trader had. Sapient species listed them under sub-tier fauna, meaning they were intelligent enough to communicate and use tools, but not considered a serious threat to any established power. They had no galactic allies yet. They had no seats on any council. They had been in space for less than 200 years, which in galactic terms was about as long as it took Savil Rak's species to finish building a decent harbor. The registry notes described them as emotionally unstable, physically fragile, and prone to irrational behavior under stress. The last part had always amused him. Irrational behavior. He had seen that from a dozen species. It never ended well for the irrational ones. He watched the Perseverance move through the dark and felt something very close to boredom. "Keep our distance for now," he said. 3 more days of observation. Then we move in slow. We do not want them panicking and burning their drive. We need the ship intact. Drool nodded and walked back to his station. Savil Rak turned back to the stars. He did not think about this much more. He had done this kind of operation many times. The plan was always the same. Watch, wait, move in, overwhelm, collect. He had never lost a single hunter on a civilian vessel. He did not expect today to be different. On the Perseverance, a woman named Mara Das was standing in the ship's small security office, staring at a screen that most people on the ship did not know existed. She had 2 cups of cold coffee on the desk beside her. She had not drunk either of them. She had been standing at that screen for 3 hours. The screen showed a passive long-range sensor feed, not the kind the ship's main system used, but a secondary feed she had installed herself 2 weeks into the journey. It was a habit she had picked up during 11 years in the United Earth Special Operations Division. You always ran your own sensors. You never trusted that the official ones were showing you everything. Everything. What the screen showed her right now was 3 heat signatures sitting at the edge of scanner range. They had been there for 6 hours. They were not moving closer, but they were not moving away either. They were just sitting there in the dark, being very quiet. Mara had seen things sit in the dark and be very quiet before. it was never for a good reason. She pulled up the ship's passenger manifest on the adjacent screen and looked at it for a long moment. 412 children between the ages of 4 and 15. 91 civilian adults. Most of them were families. Most of them had never been in a dangerous situation in their lives. Most of them were currently asleep or eating dinner in the common hall, one deck below. She closed the manifest. Then she opened a channel to the ship's internal AI system, an old military-grade intelligence that the ship's registration papers listed as decommissioned and non-operational. His name was Cole. Put that in the paperwork herself. Cole, she said quietly. Still here, Cole said. His voice was flat and even, the way it always was. I see them too. What are they? Vrethkai Hunter-class vessels, Cole said. I cross-referenced the hull geometry against 14 databases. The match probability is 96.4%. They specialize in live cargo acquisition, civilian targets. Mara was quiet for a moment. How long until they move? Based on standard Vrethkai operational patterns, 2 to 4 days. They prefer extended observation before approach. It reduces the chance of prey activating distress beacons before they can jam the signal. Can they jam ours? Yes, completely. I would give us approximately 40 seconds of transmission window before they shut us down. A distress call to the nearest human relay station would take 11 minutes to arrive. The nearest vessel that could respond would need 6 hours. Mara picked up one of the cold coffees and finally drank it. She set the cup down and looked at her own reflection in the dark part of the screen. She was 38 years old. She had brown skin and short hair that had started going gray at the temples. She had a scar on her left forearm from a mission she was not allowed to talk about. She was supposed to be retired. She was supposed to be on this ship as a security consultant, which was a polite way of saying a glorified escort guard for a bunch of kids going to a new colony world. She had taken the job because a friend had asked her to. She had taken it because she thought it would be quiet. She looked at the 3 heat signatures on the screen. Cole, she said, I need you to pull up the ship's full internal layout, every maintenance corridor, every access hatch, every sealed junction. I need the complete map. Already on your secondary screen, Cole said. I also need a full inventory of everything in the cargo hold, the engine room, and the emergency supply lockers. I mean everything, down to the last bolt. Compiling now. And I need you to run a quiet background diagnostic on the FTL drive. I want to know exactly how fast we can push it if we need to. Noted, Cole said. Should I also wake your security team? Mara thought about it. Not yet. Let them sleep. I need a few hours to think first. She sat down in the chair, pulled the full inventory list onto the screen, and started reading. She moved through it carefully and slowly the way she had been trained to do, looking for everything that could be useful, and building a picture in her head of what she could do with what she had. Outside the ship, 3 hours away in the dark, Savile Rack was already sleeping. He was not worried. That was his first mistake. The second mistake, the one that would cost him far more, was that he had looked at the passenger list and seen 412 children. He had not looked carefully enough to see the woman with the gray temples and the cold coffee, who was sitting in the dark right now and already deciding how this was going to end. The next 3 days on the Perseverance looked completely normal to anyone who was not paying attention. Families ate in the common hall. Children ran through the corridors and were told to stop running. Children ran through the corridors again. Evening lectures happened in the education bay. A movie was played on the main screen in the recreation room twice, because people liked it. The ship hummed along through the dark, the way it always did. Nobody panicked. Nobody ran. Nobody screamed. This was because Mara had told exactly 6 people what was coming, and had told all 6 of them very clearly that panic was not on the schedule. Her security team was small. Marcus was a former military police officer, tall and quiet, who never said more than 10 words at a time, but always said the right 10. Rennie was younger, fast on her feet, and had a habit of making bad jokes at exactly the wrong moment, which Mara had learned to tolerate. The other 4 were civilians. Weapons training. 3 men and 1 woman who had signed on as security assistants for the trip, because it paid well and they had expected nothing to happen. Mara had spent 2 full evenings getting them ready for something happening. She did not tell the rest of the ship. There were 400 people on board who had children with them. If she told them, some of them would make noise. Some of them would try to send messages. Noise and messages were things the Vrethkai would detect before they were ready for them to. So she smiled at people in the corridors, and ate dinner in the common hall, and answered questions about arrival times, and she spent every quiet hour in the walls. The Perseverance had maintenance corridors running between its inner and outer hull. Thin passages originally built for engineers to access power conduits and life support junctions. Most people on the ship had never been inside one. Mara had spent the better part of 2 days learning every inch of every one of them. She knew which ones ran behind the cargo bay, which ones opened near the main corridor junctions, and which ones a person could move through quickly in the dark without making a sound. Cole had given her the full map, and she had memorized it. She had also memorized where she had put things. The cargo hold inventory had turned out to be more useful than she had hoped. Compressed fuel cells, emergency decompression kits, magnetic cargo clamps rated for 2 tons of pressure, a welding unit, spare hull plating, fire suppression canisters that ran on a pressurized chemical compound she recognized from a very specific type of improvised ordnance she had built once in a desert on a different planet. She had smiled when she saw those. She did not sleep more than 2 hours at a time. She did not need to right now. On the morning of the 3rd day, Cole spoke into her earpiece. "They are moving." Savelrock's fleet came in slow, just as he had. He sent the pulse weapon first, a standard prey immobilization discharge aimed at the Perseverance's FTL drive housing. It hit clean and quiet. The long-range drive went offline in under a second. The ship was not going anywhere now. Then he sent the boarding team. 12 hunters in 2 groups of 6, coming in through the cargo bay doors, which they cut open with clean efficiency. They were armed with paralysis weapons, non-lethal, because damaged goods were worth less. And they wore full environmental suits that sealed out human atmosphere and scent. They had done this before, many times. They moved like professionals. The cargo bay was empty. Drool stepped in first and swept his scanner across the space. Nothing. 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 He turned to the hunter on his left and made a slow circle gesture with his hand. Spread out, move forward. They moved through the cargo bay and into the first interior corridor. It was quiet. Completely quiet. Lights were on, but dim. The way they went at the start of the human sleep cycle. The air recyclers hummed. There was a faint smell of cooked food somewhere deeper in the ship. Drool's scanner picked up heat signatures in the forward section, many of them, clustered, probably the main living quarters. Everything still and calm. Drool felt the first small edge of something uncomfortable, but pushed it away. This was a civilian vessel, full of children and farmers and families. It was not complicated. They reached the junction where the main corridor split into 3 branches. And then they saw the child. She was standing at the far end of the left-hand branch, maybe 20 meters away. A small human female, very young, wearing a yellow shirt. She had both arms wrapped around a stuffed animal, something soft and round with button eyes. Drool recognized the species from the data files, some kind of fictional Earth creature, manufactured as a comfort object for humans. Young, she was not running, she was not crying. She was standing completely still and looking at them with large dark eyes. Drool held up his fist. Stop. The group stopped. He studied her. His scanner read her biometrics. Heart rate slightly elevated, breathing normal, body temperature standard. No signs of acute fear response. That was strange. Human children usually showed immediate fear response when encountering Vrethkai. The size difference alone was usually enough. The average Vrethkai hunter stood a full head and a half taller than an adult human male. This child barely reached Drool's hip. He looked at the other hunters, and then he took a slow step forward. The child did not move. He took another step. She tilted her head slightly, the way a small animal did when it heard an unfamiliar sound. Drool leaned down, lowering himself toward her level, and extended the external sensor on his suit, a short filament near the collar that could read air, composition, and biological trace sense. He wanted to confirm she was alone. She smelled like warmth. She smelled like something sweet. Cole's translation of the chemical compound would later identify it as a human food product made from crushed groundnuts. It was completely harmless. The other hunters had drifted closer, curious in spite of themselves. This was the easiest operation any of them had ever run. The child looked up at Drool with her big dark eyes, and she said in a very small, very calm voice, "Miss Mara told me to tell you that you have 10 seconds to go back to your ship." Drool stared at her. One of the hunters behind him made a sound that in Vrethkai translated roughly as a laugh. Drool almost smiled himself. He had heard stranger things from frightened prey before. He opened his mouth to signal the others to move forward and collect her. The wall to his left moved. Not shook, not vibrated, moved. A maintenance hatch, swinging outward fast and hard, the edge of it catching the nearest hunter across the side of the helmet and dropping him straight to the floor before anyone had time to react. Out of the dark gap in the wall came a person. She was not large. She was not wearing armor. She had short, gray-streaked hair and dark eyes, and she moved the way very few things Drool had ever encountered moved. Without hesitation, without warmth, forward and fast, and completely without the expression of someone who was afraid. In her left hand she had something long and metal that Drool's scanner did not immediately recognize, because it was homemade. She hit the second hunter before he finished turning around. Drool stepped back. He was a veteran of 47 hunts. He was not easy to surprise. He was surprised. He raised his paralysis weapon, and the woman was already not where he was pointing it. She had moved sideways, using the hunter she had just dropped as a step, moving toward him now, and there was not a single part of her body language that said she was going to stop. The child behind Drool had already walked calmly to the side corridor, and sat down against the wall with her stuffed animal, watching. From somewhere deep in the ship, every light went out at once. Cole's voice came through the Perseverance's internal speakers in a flat, even tone and said, "Attention uninvited guests. I have locked all blast doors in sections 2 through 7. I have sealed the exterior hatch you came in through. I have also disabled your suit's short-range communication relay. You are welcome to try the manual override on the hatch if you would like to locate the panel first. I suggest you do not touch any of the wall panels near the cargo junction, because Miss Doss has placed something there that she described to me as, and I am quoting directly, a very bad surprise." The ship went dark, and the hunt began to go very wrong. The thing that made the dark useful was that Mara had already memorized everything. She had walked every corridor of the Perseverance in low light so many times in the past 3 days that her feet knew where the floor changed texture, where a wall jutted 2 centimeters further than it should, where a junction split left or right without her needing to see it. She did not need the lights, the hunters did. She moved through the blackout corridor with her back close to the wall and listened. Vrethkai hunters had excellent low-light vision. Cole had told her that much from the database files. But excellent low-light vision and pitch black were two different things, and Cole had taken out every single light source in the 3 corridor sections surrounding the hunter's entry point, including the small green emergency strips along the floor. That left a darkness so complete that even Mara could not see her own hand in front of her face. Needed to hear. Vrethkai environmental suits made a faint mechanical breath sound every 4 seconds, a pressure equalization cycle. She had listened to the recording Cole had pulled from old First Contact documentation files. She had counted the rhythm until she had it in her head, the way she had once memorized the sound of a particular engine model that told her exactly how far away a certain type of enemy vehicle was. She heard 3 of them ahead. She heard 1 moving left, 2 moving right. They were trying to spread out and use the corridor width to their advantage. She went straight at the one moving left. He was bigger than her. He was armored and she was not. He had a weapon that could drop a full-grown adult human in under a second, and she had a metal rod she had made from a hollow support strut pulled from a decommissioned storage rack, and weighted at one end with the magnetic head of a cargo clamp. She hit him twice, very fast, at the joint between his helmet and his neck seal, the place Cole had told her was the softest point in the standard Vrethkai suit construction. The second hit cracked the seal, and the suit went rigid, locking up the way they were designed to do when breached. The hunter dropped straight down, like someone had cut his strings. Mara already had his paralysis weapon. She moved. From the ship's speakers above her, Cole began playing something Mara had not specifically asked him to play, but had told him to use his judgment on. The sound that came out was an audio log of a conversation between 2 human children arguing about who got the last piece of cake. It was completely ordinary and completely wrong for the situation, and that was exactly the point. Cole had explained his own logic to Mara earlier. The Vrethkai psychological profile indicates high reliance on environmental audio cues for threat assessment. If I play distress sounds, they will calibrate to that and move predictably toward silence. If I play sounds that do not match any known threat category, their calibration breaks. They will hesitate before they act, and hesitation costs time. Mara had told him that was a good idea. It worked. The 2 hunters moving right had stopped when the children's voices started. They stood still for 3 full seconds in the dark, trying to process what they were hearing, and 3 seconds was long enough. Mara came around the junction wall and fired the paralysis weapon she had taken. Once, twice. She did not wait to see them fall. She was already moving toward the cargo bay, where the second group of 6 hunters would be trying to regroup. Drool had problems. His suit comm was dead, cut by whatever the ship's AI had done to their short-range relay. He had 4 hunters with him. He had lost 2 in the first minute, and he did not know to what exactly, because he had not seen it happen, only heard it. He had switched his helmet to its internal thermal sensor, which gave him a faint heat bloom picture of the world, and he could see his 4 remaining hunters as warm orange shapes, and the corridor walls as cool blue-gray. There was no heat bloom for the woman. He had been scanning for her for 4 minutes, and she was not showing up. Cole had anticipated this too. Mara had applied a thin layer of a particular insulating compound to her clothing, emergency thermal blanket material, cut and wrapped, which brought her surface temperature signature down to within 3 degrees of the ambient corridor temperature. She was not invisible to thermal scanning. She was just invisible enough. Drool backed his group into the cargo bay because it was the largest space and gave him the most room to see threats coming from any direction. He posted 2 hunters at each of the 2 corridor entrances and put himself in the center with the best scanner angle, and he waited. Cole played a new audio track. This one was a recording of a human grandmother reading a story to a child. The grandmother's voice was slow and warm, and described something called a honey badger, a small animal from the human homeworld, apparently famous for attacking things many times its own size, and surviving damage that should have been fatal. Cole had chosen it very deliberately. Drool did not understand the words, but his translator gave him a rough output, and he read it and felt another small cold edge of discomfort in his chest. Then the fire suppression system in the cargo bay activated. Not because of fire, because Cole had triggered it manually. The suppression agent was not the standard water mist version that the ship used in living areas. It was the chemical foam system designed for engine-adjacent cargo fires. A thick white pressurized compound that billowed out from the ceiling vents in a dense cloud and coated everything it touched in under 6 seconds. Drool's thermal scanner whited out completely. Two of his hunters shout. He heard something impact heavily to his right. He swung his weapon toward the sound and fired and hit nothing but the foam-coated wall. Something hit him in the back of the knee from behind, low and hard, targeting the joint gap in his suit. The leg buckled. He went down on one knee and spun, and she was right there, 2 feet away, completely white with foam from head to boot, and she looked like something that had crawled out of the ship itself. She was bleeding from somewhere on her left shoulder. He could see the darker color spreading through the foam. He had hit her, or one of his hunters had hit her at some point, and the injury was real. She was not slowing down. He raised his weapon. She knocked it sideways with the metal rod and drove the butt end of the stolen paralysis weapon into the center of his helmet visor so hard the display cracked. He sat down hard on the cargo bay floor, and the world went sideways. She stood over him for exactly 1 second. Then she took his weapon too and walked away. From the ceiling speaker directly above the cargo bay, Cole said in a perfectly calm voice, "That is 6 down, Miss Doss. 6 hunters neutralized, 0 fatalities, all secured by corridor blast doors. Commander Savile Rack appears to be reacting to the loss of his team's signals. I estimate he will make a decision about sending additional forces within the next 20 to 40 minutes. Mara wiped foam off her face with her sleeve. How many more does he have? Approximately 20 additional combat-rated personnel aboard his command ship, plus 4 crew members on each of the 2 support vessels. He will likely send a full second squad if he decides this situation is recoverable. Mara looked down at Drool, who was sitting against the cargo bay wall, and staring at her with the expression of someone who had just revised every assumption they had made about the day. Was at his eye level. She said slowly and clearly, so the translator on his suit could pick it up. Tell your commander that the ship's security system is more extensive than your scans suggested, and that he should consider leaving now, while the decision is still his to make. Drool stared at her. Mara stood back up and looked at Cole's nearest camera node on the ceiling. Cole, she said, how are the kids? All passengers are secure in the forward living quarters, Cole said. Miss Yara is still sitting in the junction corridor with her stuffed bear, and has asked me twice if you are okay. Mara was quiet for 1 second. Tell her I'm fine, she said. Tell her to go back with the others now. She walked toward the corridor to begin preparing for the second wave, and she was already running numbers in her head about the fuel cells and the airlock seals and exactly how much pressure a magnetic cargo clamp could generate if it was placed in a very specific location along a boarding tube's exterior connection point. Outside, in the dark, Savile Rack stared at his silent communication board, and his hands were very still, and his eyes were not calm anymore. Savile Rack was a patient being by nature. He had built his entire career on patience. He had waited out storms, waited out panicked prey, waited out diplomatic delays and market fluctuations, and the slow grind of interstellar transit. He was not someone who made quick decisions under pressure. He thought things through. He assessed. He planned. He was currently not feeling very patient. His communication board was showing him nothing from the boarding team. Nothing from Drool. Nothing from any of the 12 hunters he had sent into that small, ugly human ship. There was no distress signal. They had jammed all outgoing signals from the Perseverance before the operation began, so no signal could leave at all, in any direction, friendly or otherwise. But there was also no update, no status report, no confirmation that the collection was proceeding. There was just silence. He had been staring at the silence for 31 minutes. His senior crew officer, Vel, stood at his left shoulder and said nothing, because Vel was smart enough to know when silence was the correct response. Finally, Savalrak spoke. "Send the second squad." Vel hesitated for one moment, just long enough for Savalrak to notice it, and then said, "Yes, Commander." The second squad was 20 hunters, full combat loadout, non-lethal still, but the heavy version, the kind of paralysis weapons that could drop a large, dangerous animal at distance. They came in on 2 boarding tubes, attaching to the Perseverance's exterior hull at 2 separate points simultaneously. The approach was textbook. Split entry, high pressure, overwhelm any resistance by sheer numbers and speed. They never reached the interior. Mara had spent the 40 minutes between the first engagement and the second one, doing 3 things. The first thing was checking on Marcus and Rennie and the other 4 members of her security team. Living quarters the entire time, keeping the passengers calm and contained. He had done this without incident, which did not surprise her. Rennie had been covering the ship's secondary access corridor with 2 of the civilian team, and had not had any contact with the hunters, which also did not surprise her, because Mara had specifically chosen the entry point the hunters were most likely to use, based on the ship's hull layout, and had made sure that was the corridor she personally covered. The second thing was checking her shoulder. Marcus had looked at it with the ship's medical scanner, and told her the paralysis weapon discharge had caught the outer edge of her deltoid, a partial hit, which was why she was still moving, because a full hit would have shut her arm down completely. It hurt in a very serious and focused way that she had learned over many years to simply set to one side and not discuss. The scanner said nothing was broken. The third thing was the outer hull. Had explained to Cole what she needed, and Cole had walked her through the mechanics of it. And then she had spent 35 minutes in an environment suit, moving along the Perseverance's outer hull in open space, attaching things to the 2 most likely external boarding tube connection points. The things she attached were built from components that Cole had correctly identified from the cargo inventory. Emergency airlock pressure release valves modified to trigger on contact, magnetic cargo clamps set to maximum discharge, and 4 of the pressurized fire suppression canisters from the cargo hold, each one positioned to direct its full output into the sealed space of a boarding tube the moment the tube's connection collar locked onto the hull. Cole had told her while she was working, "I want to note that this specific configuration of hull-mounted components violates approximately 17 regulations under the Interstellar Civilian Shipping Safety Code. Through 9. Mara had said, "Log a complaint." Cole had said, "Logged. You should also know that the second squad is now approaching on my long-range sensor. They will reach boarding position in approximately 6 minutes." Mara had finished attaching the last clamp and moved back to the airlock. The second squad came in fast and professional. Both boarding tubes hit the hull at the same time, exactly as planned. The connection collars locked into position with a solid mechanical clunk that Savalrak could feel through the floor of his own ship, 20 kilometers away. Then the tubes went wrong. The pressure release valves triggered the moment the collar locks engaged. The magnetic clamps discharged into the tube walls, which in a sealed pressurized tube at boarding pressure had the effect of a very loud and very violent mechanical failure. The foam suppression canisters emptied themselves completely into both tubes in under 4 seconds. Them, with dense white chemical compound under high pressure. 7 hunters in the first tube were caught between the entry hatch and the outer airlock in the worst possible moment. They were neither inside nor outside, trapped in a cramped space that was now full of pressurized foam and vibrating structural noise and complete sensor whiteout. The other 13 hunters in the second tube saw what was happening to the first tube on their helmet displays and did the reasonable thing. They disengaged and tried to pull the boarding tube back. The magnetic clamps, still partially attached to the hull plating, made that take 4 times longer than it should have. By the time both boarding squads were back on their own ships and accounted for, Savile Rack had lost 7 hunters to hull exposure injuries, 4 more to foam-related equipment failure, and 2 to what the medical report would later describe as impact trauma consistent with a pressure discharge event. Had sent 32 hunters to collect children on an unarmed civilian vessel. He had 20 left. He sat in his command chair and stared at the Perseverance on his main screen, and his face was doing something it had not done in a very long time. It was doing nothing at all, which for a Vrethkai commander meant the inside was doing a great deal. Then a communication signal opened on his board. Not on any channel he had given out. Not through any frequency his team had been monitoring. It came in on his own private command frequency, the one that required a specific encryption code that no one outside Vrethkai command structure was supposed to have. His communication officer stared at it. "Commander, this signal is coming from inside the human ship." Savile Rack stared at the board. He opened the channel. The voice that came through was a woman's voice. It was calm. It was not angry, which was the thing that unsettled him most about it. Anger. He understood anger. Anger told you where you stood. Calm from someone who had just done what this person had done told him something else entirely. She spoke and the translator rendered it in flat, even Vrethkai syllables. "I know you can hear me. I am the security officer on this vessel. You have disabled our FTL drive. You have sent 32 hunters onto this ship, and you have gotten nothing for it. I am going to tell you 2 things, and I need you to listen to both of them carefully, because I will only say them once." Savile Rack said nothing. The woman continued, "The first thing is this. If you send anyone else onto this ship, I will make what happened to your second squad look like a minor inconvenience. I have been preparing this ship for 3 days, and I am not close to running out of options. You should understand clearly that I am telling you this as a simple fact, and not as an emotional threat." Savile Rack's hands were flat on the arms of his chair. "The second thing is this. You broke my ship's FTL drive when you hit it with your pulse weapon. That means 400 people on this vessel cannot continue to their destination under their own power. You are going to tow us to the nearest transit station. The distance is approximately 9 hours at your fleet's standard speed. You are going to do this because you broke the drive, and it is the correct thing to do to fix what you broke." There was a pause. Then the woman's voice said one more thing. "If I ever see a Vrethkai hunting vessel near a human ship again, I will come to your home port myself, and I will be in a considerably worse mood than I am today. I will find you specifically. If you want to verify that I am capable of doing that, I would suggest you run my name through whatever database your fleet uses." Mara Das, formerly of the United Earth Special Operations Division, Warrant Officer Class 3, retired. Another pause. "I am attaching my service record to this transmission, so you do not have to look it up." The channel closed. The communication officer turned to look at Savile Rack, very slowly. The service record file opened on the display screen beside the comm board. Savile Rack read the first 3 lines of it. He looked at the Perseverance on the main screen for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was very quiet and very carefully controlled, "Plot a tow course to the nearest transit station." Vel said, "Yes, Commander," and did not say anything else at all. The Vrethkai fleet began moving forward to attach a tow line, and the Perseverance, battered, foam-coated, FTL drive offline, with 6 paralyzed hunters in its locked cargo bay, and a woman with a bad shoulder sitting in the security office drinking cold coffee. The Galactic Registry of Sapient Species had its main offices on Verith Station, a large commercial hub that sat near the center of the Outer Corridor Transit Network. The registry was one of the oldest institutions in the known galaxy. It had been cataloging and classifying intelligent species for over 3,000 years. Its records were considered the most accurate and comprehensive database on sapient life in existence. Its classification system was precise, Its standards were high. Its committee members did not change their official designations lightly. The committee was meeting in a medium-sized conference room on the station's upper tier when Ambassador Drool of the Vrethkai Syndicate was brought in. He was no longer wearing a hunter's suit. He was wearing formal diplomatic clothing, and he walked with a slight stiffness in his left leg that had not been there before his last assignment. He sat down across from the 5 committee members and placed a data chip on the table in front of him, and said nothing. The senior committee member, an elder Thalori named Ven Osh, who had been classifying species for over 300 years, looked at the data chip and then looked at Drool. This is the formal reclassification request for the human species. Yes, Drool said. Ven Osh picked up the chip and loaded it into the room's display system. The preliminary file opened and he read the summary, and then he read it again. The other 4 committee members leaned forward. The summary described the incident aboard the HSV Perseverance in clear, factual terms. The operation, the composition of the boarding teams, the timeline, the outcome. It included full sensor logs from the Vrethkai fleet's external scanners. It included the hull impact data from the second boarding attempt. It included the translated text of the communication transmission from the Perseverance's security officer. It included Mara Doss's service record. Of the committee members, a young Farathi representative, attending only her 3rd full committee session, read through the service record file and made a quiet sound that in her species language was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Ven Osh said to Drool, "Your fleet sent 32 trained combat hunters against a ship with 6 security personnel, and you are requesting that the human species be reclassified as a result." Drool said, "Yes. The current classification is sub-tier fauna. I am aware of that." Ven Osh looked at the sensor logs still playing on the display, the thermal scan recording from Drool's own helmet from inside the Perseverance, showing the white foam-covered figure moving toward him with 2 weapons, and an injury that showed clearly on the heat bloom readout. "I see the recording shows the security officer had been struck by a paralysis weapon discharge prior to this moment." "Yes." And she continued. The room was quiet for a moment. The Farathi representative said carefully, "The registry's standard process for reclassification requires a minimum of 3 independent documented incidents before a species threat tier can be formally revised." Drool reached into the case beside his chair and placed 2 more data chips on the table. He said, "Those are 2 additional incident reports filed in the past 18 months by other hunting syndicate members who encountered human resistance on civilian vessels. Both reports were originally classified internally and not submitted to the registry. I am submitting them now." He paused. "There are also 6 more reports that I have been informed exist but have not yet been formally filed. I expect they will be submitted shortly. The syndicates involved are not eager to advertise these outcomes, but the incidents occurred." Ven Osh looked at the 2 new chips and then at Drool for a long moment. "Moment, P," he said. "This committee will review all submitted materials and convene a full reclassification hearing within 30 days. Drool stood, nodded once, picked up his case and left. The committee sat in silence for a while. Then Ven Osh pulled up the registry's internal classification interface on his personal terminal and opened the working file for the human species. He did not wait for the formal hearing. He made an unofficial notation, a working flag that other registry staff would see when they accessed the file, intended to flag species that required updated handling guidance before formal reclassification was complete. He typed carefully. The notation read, "Caution flag, species under review for threat tier revision. Preliminary evidence indicates significant discrepancy between current sub-tier fauna designation and actual threat profile. See attached incident records regarding cornered prey response, high pain tolerance threshold, sustained function under injury, and non-standard defensive behaviors. Note: threat profile appears to escalate sharply when juvenile members of the species are at risk. Recommend all registry staff and affiliated organizations exercise caution in any engagement scenario until formal reclassification is complete. He paused and then added one more line at the bottom of the notation. See also, honey badger, small terrestrial predator, human homeworld, Earth, classified in registry fauna database as apex deterrent class despite substandard physical dimensions. Notable characteristic: does not acknowledge the concept of a fight it cannot win. Recommend cross-referencing this classification with revised human threat profile for comparative analysis. He saved the file and leaned back in his chair. The Farathi representative across the table was still reading Mara Doss's service record. She turned a page and made that quiet, sharp sound again. Ceiling of the conference room, and thought for the first time in a long career of thinking carefully about such things, that the galaxy had perhaps been very lucky that humans were only 200 years into their expansion, and not 2,000. 6 months after the incident aboard the Perseverance, on a different ship headed to a different destination, Mara Doss sat in a corridor, with her back against the wall. Her arm was fully healed. The shoulder still made a particular grinding sound when she rotated it in cold temperatures, and the medical officer on the new ship had told her that was going to be permanent. Mara had told the medical officer that she had worse. The medical officer had read her file and not argued with her. Sitting next to her in the corridor was a small girl in a yellow shirt, now faded from washing, holding the same stuffed bear with the button eyes. The girl's name was Yara. She was 8 years old. She had on her chest a small badge made of printed cardstock that had the word crew on it in large uneven letters. Cole had printed it from the Perseverance's document system in the hours after the incident, because he had decided, in his own logic, that someone who performed the role Yara had performed deserved formal recognition. Mara had let him do it. She had not told him to take it back. The corridor was quiet. The ship hummed around them. The stars outside the viewport moved the way stars moved in transit. Not at all to the naked eye, because the distances involved were too large for human perception to measure, even when everything was moving very fast. Yara had her legs stretched out in front of her, and was looking at the stuffed bear's button eyes. She asked without looking up, "Were you scared?" Mara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the floor of the corridor, and then at the viewport, and then at the small card badge on Yara's shirt. She said, "Every single second." Yara thought about this for a moment. While the way children think about things, slowly and completely, and without rushing it, she turned the stuffed bear over in her hands. She said, "But you didn't stop." Mara looked at the viewport. She said, "Stopping wasn't on the list." Yara nodded, as if this made complete sense, which to her it did. She leaned her head sideways against Mara's arm, and held the stuffed bear in her lap, and watched the stars. From the ship's intercom above them, the navigation officer's voice announced in a calm, professional tone that the jump to FTL would begin in 3 minutes, and all passengers were requested to secure themselves in their seats or approved rest areas. Mara did not move. Yara did not move. The ship's engines changed their pitch, deepening from a hum to something felt more than heard, a low vibration that moved through the floor and the walls and the soles of their feet. The stars outside the viewport shifted, and then they streaked. Long white lines pulled from points of light as the ship crossed the threshold into faster-than-light travel. And then the viewport was full of white and blue light, the way it always was, inside an FTL jump. Beautiful and strange and going somewhere. The corridor was warm. The stuffed bear had its button eyes pointing at the viewport. Mara closed her own eyes and let the ship carry them forward.